Let's hear from my colleagues. Councilmember Valenzuela, we'll begin with you.
Thank you. I want to thank staff for bringing this forward because, as you mentioned, I mean, we've been talking about this for at least the last 13 years. And so I'm really glad that we're looking at it today because, as the mayor mentioned in your comments, which I really agree with, there's a tension here between what we're being asked to do and the fact that we simply don't have the money to do it. And so we don't like the thought of not partnering with Downtown Sacramento Partnership on DCR outreach, for example. We don't like the thought that we won't be able to do small business grants and support. I mean, these are the tensions that I think we're confronting, and I think it's mature and disciplined for us to really look at our revenue and how we right-size it for where our city is at and compare it to other cities around us. And I think, frankly, if I'm being honest, the proposal in front of us is fairly conservative, and it got a little more conservative since the Law and Ledge meeting because this phase-in, as I mentioned during my question to Peter, because I wanted to make sure I read the chart correctly, it only benefits businesses that make $100 million or more, right? And so, I mean, these are not small businesses. These are not the storefronts that are on K Street. I mean, these are businesses that are fairly large. And what we're talking about is $150,000 in total, right? I mean, this isn't like I'm asking them to pay, 4%, like we ask cannabis businesses to pay. I'm asking them to pay 1/100th of that percent, of their total receipts. So I frankly don't want to do the phase-in approach for that reason, because I appreciate that folks want to temper. But I mean, when we're talking about $150,000 and you're making $1 billion, which is the rate that you'd have to be at least at for gross receipts or higher to pay the maximum, I believe. Like, I mean, come on. Let's be real here. I mean, that's a really significant business who is more than able to pay $150,000, especially knowing that it contributes to us continuing homeless services, continuing business support, continuing all the stuff that we've started doing during the pandemic that frankly we don't have the money to continue because that was a lot of one-time money. I'm also in favor of considering eliminating the cap, but I think more than that, because also, I just have to say, I know this isn't an item about the cannabis BOT and this wasn't in my notes, but like we literally charge cannabis businesses 100 times the rate that we charge other businesses, and there is no cap for them. And so I think that there is some very important points that got brought up here today, and I do think there's room, not necessarily to go from 0.04 to 4, because that would obviously be insane to make that quick of a jump, but like, can we talk about an additional 0.01%? And make it 0.05? Can we talk like a very incremental, like what would that look like for the city's budget? And I don't know if we've modeled that, but like to look at 0.05, it's a 0.01% increase on these businesses, and to be able to say, hey, here's something. And because I think that we need to recognize there's a tension also going on right now between like a whole host of city priorities, and I don't feel comfortable that this is going to get us to a point where that tension goes away just yet. So I do want to explore that. I also want to raise the small business exemption to $100,000 a year, both because I don't think it has any impact on the revenue we expect, and because as someone who has been a sole proprietor for a really long time, $50,000 of gross receipts, once you take taxes out, like you're not even making a full-time salary at that level. So I don't know if $50,000 is really appropriate, and given the charts that you've showing the impacts here and how it breaks down, I feel comfortable asking for that threshold to be raised to $100,000 and know that it's not going to make a significant dent on the revenue, if any dent, that we're looking at. I think for my colleagues who aren't on Law and Ledge, I want to make clear that my concern that I raised was not about the impact that this rate increase would have on grocery stores, but the impact the current rate has on stores who do have, I think it's possible for us to be attuned to business groups that have really low, really high expenses, and how do we calibrate the tax to make more sense for them, given this is a gross receipts tax. And so I do really want to think about, especially if we're only talking about potentially 75 businesses, what that would look like to have a different rate. Because I've seen other cities that do things like define it based on the percentage of floor space that's uncooked produce, right? Or based on the like there's ways that cities have done this, and I do understand that that would be an additional administrative burden, but I am very sensitive to the fact that I don't want to harm businesses that are literally providing food to our communities, and so I want to figure out how we do that. And maybe it doesn't need to be a part of the ballot measure, and it's something that we can work on separately, and I'd love for staff to let me know if you feel like that needs to be a part of a ballot measure, if that's something we could pursue separately, because I'm really interested in doing a grocery store measure that is slightly different, recognizing the unique circumstances that they're in. But those are my final things, Mayor. I will say I'm not supportive of the phase-in. I actually think that the rate and the cap could probably be higher. I would like the small business definition to be higher, and I would really like to think about what a grocery store rate looks like, if that's essential to be a part of the ballot measure, if we can do that separately on a separate track. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. When you talk about the small business threshold being higher, you mean you want fewer small businesses to have to pay the
Yeah, I want more
increase.
small businesses to be able to pay less.
Pay less.
So it's the flat rate of $50 to go up to folks who have receipts of $100,000. Oh.
Okay, very good. Councilmember Valenzuela, then Vice Mayor.
So sometimes I think we put ourselves in these positions to make it so complicated. I just want to say that the last legal date to put something on the ballot is December 8th. Now, granted, we need to have arguments submitted before then. There needs to be an independent analysis. It's not like when Measure O, I think we wrote those arguments over a weekend. That wasn't super fun for anybody involved. But I guess I just want to say that I think I am uncomfortable with the level of change happening in the moment, given that we are asking to send something to the voters that they are going to vote on that we will not be able to change again unless they vote on it again. So what I would love to request is, as part of the next meeting, I still think we should amend the ordinance and ballot measure stuff on the ballot, on the agenda, so that we can act. But I do think it would be nice to see some scenarios from staff here on some of the things we've discussed, so that there's further changes made. I mean, you have 2 weeks. We don't have a meeting next week to say, what would it look like? How would the 200,000 cap affect, and I know I'm banging the drum here on the 0.01% increase. I mean, these are things that I just think I'd like to have this in front of us. And I mean, when I did my briefing with staff, I asked about actually a more progressive tax structure that actually went increase as businesses went up, which is something about what we kind of just did. And so I guess I just want to make sure that we have all of the different models in front of us. So if there's further changes made, we're not just pulling numbers out of our heads, but that we're actually looking at some analysis from staff and can really be thoughtful about how these rates might change and what further clarification we might make before we decide to put this on the ballot next week or in 2 weeks potentially. So that's my ask, as well as obviously the language for the sector-based potential.
Can I ask a clarifying question? So what scenarios are you asking to run, just so that's not exhaustive?
So you're hearing and I appreciate, again, I agree, let's go. Let's eliminate the cap. No, I'm kidding. But let's say the idea of raising the cap for certain businesses over a certain threshold, what that would look like. I think I put forward, and I don't know if there's support on the dais, but a 0.01% rate increase to make it 0.05%, which is in line with what our surrounding comparable jurisdictions are at. I think those would be 2 examples. I don't know if folks have other requests they'd like to add to that, but it would be nice just to see that mapped out, similar to the way we have the current phase-in mapped out, so that we can be thoughtful in 2 weeks about what final language we put in the ballot.
Well, I think that's going to be, the direction we get here today. If that's the model you always want us to take a look at, but if there's not support for it, I'd hate to have our team run those scenarios. Only not to be considered.
It shouldn't be that difficult, right, to just do 1 or 2 variations based on what you heard here, right? Is it?
Well, that's why I'm asking the clarifying question. What is it that you want us to run?
And I'm saying this for me too, because I have been asking for different ideas, and I know that was a lot to say, but something like grocery stores, which I brought up in Long Ledge, it's I think that I don't feel like we're being as thoughtful about all the different scenarios as we could be before doing something like putting something on the ballot for voters to approve that will then be the law until we do another ballot measure. And so I am not comfortable without seeing some more data to make these changes. And I think it would behoove us next week, or in 2 weeks, to have a little bit more information about some different scenarios we've talked about today, raising the cap for high earners, potentially adjusting the rate 0.1% higher, what that looks like, how that would affect different businesses of different sizes, so that we can understand what that means. And for me, when it comes to the rate of over 200, I'd like to know what that translates to. And one of the things that bothers me about our chart is the buckets are so big. It's really hard to see if the difference is between 500 million and $1 billion, if there's any way for us to break that out to be a little bit more finer, to whatever degree you have the data. If you don't have the data, then fine. But I think that would be helpful for me as well.
I think we could run those, 3 scenarios?
Yeah.
That would be great.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward, yes.
Good, thank you.